Florida. Part 1. The Two Henrys in the History of Florida.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away.
Part 1 Table of Contents.
This is a brief but comprehensive overview of Florida. Part 1. Flagler and Plant. And the history of Florida. With visiting and touring information, geography, history, attractions, and other points of interest.
Dr. Sydney Soclof. Dr. Sydney 22 at gmail.com. 2022. Narration by Dr. Sydney Soclof.
Zoe Phonemes.
And Nathan Colton. For a more complete discussion of YouTube navigation, please go to this video using the link here.
Florida. Part 1. The Two Henrys and the History of Florida.
Henry Morrison Flagler. Henry Bradley Plant. And the History of Florida. Henry Flagler. His Railroad. And the Florida Gold Coast.
Henry Morrison Flagler was a financier and partner of John D. Rockefeller, Sr. in establishing the Standard Oil Company. He pioneered in the development of Florida as a U.S. vacation center.
Henry Morrison Flagler was born in Hopewell, New York in 1830, and was the son of a poor minister. Received only an 8th grade education before leaving home at 14, to work in his cousin's store in Ohio.
Bellevue is in northern Ohio, 70 miles west of Cleveland.
Around 1850, Flagler became a grain merchant in Bellevue, Ohio, where he met John D. Rockefeller, and sold grain through him.
After Flagler's business of salt manufacturing in Saginaw, Michigan collapsed following the end of the Civil War, Flagler moved to Cleveland and soon joined Rockefeller and chemist and inventor Samuel Andrews in forming Rockefeller, Andrews and Flagler in 1867.
Rockefeller, Andrews and Flagler later became the Standard Oil Company.
By 1872, Standard Oil led the American oil refining industry, producing 10,000 barrels per day. This is the Standard Oil Refinery No. 1 in Cleveland, Ohio in 1899. The
first oil fields were in northeastern Pennsylvania, and Cleveland was the major rail and lake shipping center in the region. In 1877, Standard Oil moved its headquarters from Cleveland to New York City, and Flagler and his family moved there as well. Flagler directed the construction of the new Standard Oil headquarters building at 26 Broadway in Manhattan.
By 1904, Standard Oil was the largest corporation in the U.S., and controlled 91% of the oil production and had sales worldwide. Flagler served as director of Standard Oil until 1911.
Flagler and Rockefeller were partners in Standard Oil Company.
Flagler's wife Mary had been very ill with bronchitis for a very long time. His physician advised him to take Mary to a warmer climate, like Florida during the winter.
Therefore, in 1878, on the advice of his physician, Flagler traveled with Mary to Jacksonville, Florida, for the winter.
At that time, Jacksonville was the second largest city in Florida, with a population of 7,000.
The largest city in the state was Key West, with 10,000 population. St. Augustine's population was only 2,100, and that of Tampa was less than 1,000.
Most of the state's population was in the north adjacent to Georgia and Alabama. The southern part of the state was mostly an uninhabited area of swamps and wilderness.
There was no Miami as such. Instead, there was a fort built during the Seminole Wars on the Miami River known as Fort Dallas. with perhaps 100 settlers in the area.
By 1900 the population had increased considerably, but was still small. The population was still mostly in the northern part of the state, with the southern portion relatively unpopulated.
The major exception was Key West, which was the third most populous city at 17,000.
Here is Henry and Mary Flagler, with Isabel Harkness, Mary's sister.
2 years after Mary died in 1881, Flagler married again. Ida Ellis, née Shords, Flagler had been a caregiver for Mary Flagler.
Chapter 2. St. Augustine.
After their wedding, the couple traveled to St. Augustine.
St. Augustine is the oldest city in the U.S. founded in 1565. It is about 50 miles south of Jacksonville, and at that time was a very small town of just 2,000 people.
Juan Ponce de Leon, a Spanish conquistador, discovered Florida on April 2, 1513. During Pascua Florida, a Spanish term for the Easter season,
he decided to name the new land for the season.
So from that date forward, the land became known as La Florida.
Ponce de Leon was said to be searching Florida for the legendary Fountain of Youth.
The city of St. Augustine is home to the Fountain of Youth National Archaeological Park at the spot where Ponce de Leon is traditionally said to have landed in 1513.
Flagler found St. Augustine charming,
but the hotel facilities and transportation systems inadequate. However, he recognized Florida's potential to attract out-of-state visitors.
Although Flagler remained on the board of directors of Standard Oil, he gave up his day-to-day involvement in the corporation in order to pursue his interests in Florida. He returned to St. Augustine in 1885 and began construction on the 540-room Ponce de Leon Hotel.
The Hotel Ponce de Leon opened on January 10, 1888, and was an instant success.
This is the portico and gateway of the Hotel Ponce de Leon.
This is a vintage postcard of the Hotel Ponce de Leon.
Louis Tiffany was hired to decorate the interiors. His stained glass windows in the hotel established his reputation.
This is the hotel in Alcazar Park in front of it. The Hotel Ponce de Leon is now part of Flagler College.
Shortly after the Ponce de Leon Hotel was completed, Flagler built the Alcazar Hotel nearby for the less affluent visitors.
Flagler's personal dedication to the state of Florida was demonstrated when he began construction on his private residence, Kirkside, in St. Augustine.
The same year that the Ponce de Leon Hotel opened, Flagler's daughter, Jenny Louise, died. Flagler built the Memorial Presbyterian Church in St. Augustine in her memory.
Chapter 3. Flagler's Railroad.
Flagler realized the need for a sound transportation system to support his hotel ventures, so he purchased the Jacksonville, St. Augustine and Halifax Railroad.
The Jacksonville, St. Augustine, Halifax, and Indian River Railroad became, after several name changes, the Florida East Coast Railway in 1895.
This would be the first railroad in what would become known as the Flagler System, or the Florida East Coast Railway, which exists to the present day.
During the 1890s, Flagler built a chain of luxury hotels along the rail line as well as in Nassau, in the Bahama Islands. He also dredged Miami Harbor and established steamship lines to Key West and Nassau.
This is the streamliner on the Florida East Coast Railway.
This is the Florida East Coast Railway Depot in Sebastian, Florida. The structure was built in 1893.
A 1913 print advertisement extols the many advantages of traveling on the Florida East Coast Railway, the new route to the Panama Canal.
And every day a June day, full of sunshine.
The railroad was advertised as part of the new route to the Panama Canal. Note the hotels along the route.
Promotional excursions, such as the Florida Special, helped make the state the tourist mecca it is today.
With the acquisition and expansion of the railroads, Flagler also expanded his Florida holdings. He built a railroad bridge across the St. Johns River to gain access to the southern half of the state, and purchased the Hotel Ormond, just north of Daytona Beach.
This is Hotel Ormond, just north of Daytona Beach.
Flagler extended his railroad to West Palm Beach in 1894.
Also in 1894, Flagler completed the 1,100-room Royal Poinciana Hotel on the shores of Lake Worth in Palm Beach.
The Royal Poinciana Hotel was at the time the largest wooden structure in the world, as well as the largest hotel in the world.
It could accommodate up to 1,500 guests. During the busiest times in the winter season, the hotel had 320 waiters in its dining rooms.
Many famous and wealthy guests stayed at the Royal Poinciana.
West Palm Beach is across the narrow Lake Worth from Palm Beach. West Palm Beach was developed by Flagler to house the construction and service workers who worked in Palm Beach.
This is Palm Beach, West Palm Beach, and Lake Worth.
This is West Palm Beach, circa 1894.
For a time, West Palm Beach was the southern terminus of the railroad.
This is the Royal Poinciana Hotel and Grounds.
This again is the Royal Poinciana Hotel and Grounds.
This is the Royal Poinciana Hotel.
This is a view of the hotel across Lake Worth from West Palm Beach.
This is the grill room at the Royal Poinciana Hotel.
Hotel Royal Poinciana from Lake Worth.
In 1896 Flagler built a Palm Beach Inn, renamed the Breakers Hotel in 1901, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean in Palm Beach.
The Breakers Hotel was built by Flagler as a winter retreat for the very rich. At the time, it was reportedly the largest wooden structure in the world.
The Breakers had 2,000 rooms. It burned down in 1903 and again in 1925. But each time it was quickly rebuilt. The 6-story, Georgian-style hotel became the largest hotel in the world at the time, with hallways totaling more than 3 miles in length. It was so large that bellops delivered messages to guests by bicycle. In 1973 the Breakers was added to the U.S. National Register of Historic Places. Flagler originally intended for West Palm Beach to be the terminus of his railroad system.
Chapter 4. Extension of the railroad to Miami.
But a freeze during the winter of 1894-95 killed most of Florida's citrus crop.
This freeze extended south down the Florida peninsula, reaching almost to present-day West Palm Beach. 60 miles south, the town known today as Miami was reportedly unharmed by the freeze.
Julia Tuttle, an early resident of what was to become Miami, reportedly sent Flagler a fresh orange blossom to prove that the freeze had not reached Miami.
To further convince Flagler to continue the railroad to Miami, he was offered land in exchange for laying rail tracks. This offer was from private landowners, including Julia Tuttle, who ran a trading post on the Miami River. This convinced Flagler to extend the railroad down to Miami.
Flagler's railroad, renamed the Florida East Coast Railway in 1895, reached Biscayne Bay by 1896. This led to the development of Miami, which was only an unincorporated area at the time.
Flagler encouraged fruit farming and settlement along his railway line and made many gifts to build hospitals, churches and schools in Florida.
Flagler dredged a channel, built streets, instituted the first water and power systems, and financed the city's first newspaper, the Metropolis.
This is the Miami Metropolis of May 15, 1896.
When the city was incorporated in 1896, its citizens wanted to honor the man responsible for its growth by naming it Flagler.
Flagler declined the honor, persuading them to use an old Indian name, Miami.
This is Henry Morrison Flagler, builder of Florida and father of Miami.
In 1897, Flagler opened the exclusive Royal Palm Hotel in Miami. He became known as the father of Miami.
The Hotel Royal Palm was named because of the extensive royal palm trees in the area.
Flagler's second wife, the former Ida Alice Shorts, had been institutionalized for mental illness since 1895. In 1901, Flagler married his third wife, Mary Lily Keenan.
A 1901 headline in the West Palm Beach Tropical Sun announced the divorce of Flagler, whose wife, Alice, was institutionalized in New York.
Although insanity wasn't recognized as grounds for divorce in New York or Florida, the Florida legislature changed its law in 1901, allowing the politically powerful Flagler to marry Mary Lily Keenan.
Rumors spread that Flagler had bought the legislature. Nothing was proved at the time, but 70 years later it was discovered that the price he had paid to members of the 1901 legislature was $125,000.
The Flagler divorce law, used only by the great man himself, was repealed in 1905. Whitehall was built in 1902, as a wedding present to Flagler's third wife, Mary Lily.
Whitehall had 55 rooms, and it was the winter retreat that established the Palm Beach season for the wealthy of America's Gilded Age.
In 1902, a story in the New York Herald described Whitehall as more wonderful than any palace in Europe, grander and more magnificent than any other private dwelling in the world.
This is a view of Whitehall.
This is another view of Whitehall.
This is a view of the interior of Whitehall.
This is another view of the interior of Whitehall.
This is another view of the interior of Whitehall.
Whitehall is now known as the Flagler Museum that opened in 1960.
This is another view of the interior of Whitehall, now the Flagler Museum.
Henry Flagler's private rail car number 91 is exhibited in the museum's Flagler Keenan Pavilion. It was built in 1886 for Flagler's personal use.
The Overseas Railroad to Key West.
By 1905, Flagler decided that his Florida East Coast Railway should be extended from Biscayne Bay to Key West, a point 128 miles past the end of the Florida Peninsula.
At the time, Key West was Florida's most populous city.
And it was also the United States' closest deep water port to the canal that the U.S. government proposed to build in Panama.
Flagler wanted to take advantage of additional trade with Cuba and Latin America, as well as the increased trade with the West that the Panama Canal would bring. Also, Key West would be an important coaling station in the days of steamships.
Hundreds of workers on the Florida East Coast Railway's overseas extension were lost when a hurricane swept through the Keys and battered Miami on October 18, 1906.
In 1912, the Florida Overseas Railroad was completed to Key West.
This map shows the Florida East Coast Railway Key West extension.
This is the welcoming ceremony for Henry Flagler in Key West in 1912.
In 1913, Flagler fell down a flight of stairs at Whitehall. He never recovered from the fall, and died in Palm Beach of his injuries. He was 83 years of age.
He was buried in the Memorial Presbyterian Church in St. Augustine alongside his daughter, Jenny Louise, and first wife, Mary Harkness. Only his son, Harry, survived of the 3 children by his first marriage in 1853 to Mary Harkness.
There is a monument to Henry Flagler on Flagler Monument Island in Biscayne Bay, and Flagler College in St. Augustine is named after him.
Flagler County and Flagler Beach are also named for him, as well as many streets in cities along Florida's east coast.
A monument to Flagler was erected in 2006, in Key West, near a place where the Overseas Railroad once terminated.
Also in 2006, a statue of Henry Flagler was unveiled on the southeast steps of Miami's Dade County Courthouse, appropriately located on Miami's Flagler Street, the thoroughfare that divides South and North Miami.
The Flagler Memorial Island, with a monument to Flagler, is an artificial island that was built in Biscayne Bay near Miami Beach in 1920.
This is the monument to Henry M. Flagler on Flagler Memorial Island.
Recommended videos: Henry Morrison Flagler.
Recommended video: A Century in the Sun, Henry Flagler and the Making of Modern Florida. This is the story of how Standard Oil magnate Henry Flagler comes to Florida in the late 1800s, builds a railroad and hotel empire on the last American frontier, and launches a population boom that lasts 100 years.
Recommended video: Follow the Crowds, How Flagler and Plant Changed Florida.
Recommended video: Building the Magic City, A History of Miami. This movie examines Henry Flagler's role in the development of the Florida East Coast Railway, the state of Florida itself, and the city of Miami.
Recommended video: Henry Flagler, Steed. This is about Henry Flagler and his greatest accomplishments which helped to develop Florida's economy. Chapter 9. Overseas Highway to Key West.
The Florida East Coast Railway, from Jacksonville to Key West, runs for 522 miles, or 840 kilometers.
This is a map of the Florida East Coast Railway.
This is the northern section of the Florida East Coast Railway.
This is the southern section of the Florida East Coast Railway.
The Overseas Railroad, also known as the Key West extension of the Florida East Coast Railway, was heavily damaged and partially destroyed in the Great Labor Day Hurricane of 1935.
The Florida East Coast Railway was financially unable to rebuild the destroyed sections, so the roadbed and remaining bridges were sold to the state of Florida.
The state then built the Overseas Highway to Key West, using much of the remaining railway infrastructure.
Here is the modern highway, U.S. Route 1, which replaced the railroad. U.S. Route 1 runs from Maine all of the way down the east coast of the U.S. to Key West.
This is 7-mile bridge along the Overseas Highway to Key West.
Chapter 10. Recommended videos: Overseas Highway to Key West.
Recommended video: WPBT Flagler's Train, the Florida Keys Overseas Railroad. This chronicles the imagination and achievements of Henry Morrison Flagler, who spearheaded the development of the Overseas Railway connecting Key West to the existing Florida East Coast Railway.
Recommended video: Key West to Miami Highway Construction 1935. This is a newsreel produced by Chevrolet in 1935. It described the construction of a portion of what is now U.S. Highway 1, the Overseas Highway.
Recommended video: The Great Labor Day Florida Keys Hurricane of 1935, 3 minutes.
Recommended video: Florida Keys Overseas Highway is named All-American Road.
Henry Bradley Plant.
Henry Bradley Plant, 1819 to 1899. Founder of the Plant system of railroads and steamboats. Was born in Branford, Connecticut. The son of Betsy Bradley and Anderson Plant, who was a farmer. He was the descendant of John Plant, who emigrated from England and settled in Hartford, Connecticut, around 1639.
When Henry was 6, his father died. Several years later his mother married again and took him to live first at Martinsburg, New York, and later at New Haven, Connecticut, where he attended a private school.
His grandmother, who hoped to make a clergyman of him, offered him an education at Yale College, but he was impatient to begin an active career. At the age of 18, he got a job as captain's boy, deckhand, and man of all work on a steamboat plying between New Haven and New York.
Among his various duties was the care of express parcels, which he organized effectively. When the parcel business was taken over by the Adams Express Company and later transferred from steamboats to railroads, he went along with it. After a few years he was put in charge of the New York office of the company.
The Adams Express Company was a competitor of Wells Fargo and Company. It was incorporated in 1854 and was the paymaster for the Union Army during the Civil War.
In 1853 Plant's wife, Ellen Elizabeth Blackstone Plant, to whom he had been married in 1842, was ordered south for her health. Several months were spent near Jacksonville, then a tiny hamlet. He became impressed with the possibilities of the future development of Florida.
At that time, Jacksonville was the second largest city in Florida, with a population of 7,000.
The largest city in the state was Key West with 10,000 population. St. Augustine's population was only 2,100 and that of Tampa was less than 1,000.
Most of the state's population was in the north, adjacent to Georgia and Alabama. The southern part of the state was mostly an uninhabited area of swamps and wilderness.
There was no Miami as such. Instead there was a fort built during the Seminole Wars, on the Miami River, known as Fort Dallas, with perhaps 100 settlers in the area.
Plant became the general superintendent of the Adams Express Company for the territories south of the Potomac and Ohio rivers. In 1854, in the face of great difficulties, Plant successfully organized an extended express service in this region, where transportation facilities, although rapidly growing, were still deficient and uncoordinated.
As the Civil War approached, the directors of Adams Express feared for the confiscation of their southern properties. They decided to transfer them to Plant.
Plant organized the Southern Express Company with the southern stockholders of the company in 1861 as a Georgia corporation, and became president.
His company acted as agent for the Confederacy in collecting tariffs and transferring funds. In 1863, following a serious illness, he took an extended vacation in Europe and returned by way of Canada. This is a map of the routes in Florida of the Southern Express Company. After the Civil War, Henry Plant bought several small bankrupt rail companies serving the South and put them together to form the Plant system of railways.
A definite challenge was standardizing track, stations and equipment. Plant made the rail gauge uniform, so switching tracks at the end of each line was no longer necessary, ensuring less cumbersome travel.
The Plant system provided service from Charleston, South Carolina, through Georgia, Florida and Alabama. Connections were also provided to New York and the entire Northeast.
The railroads of the South had been practically ruined after the war, and later many railroads went bankrupt in the Depression of 1873. In this situation he found his opportunity. He was convinced of the eventual economic revival of the South, and bought at foreclosure sales in 1879 and 1880 the Atlantic and Gulf Railroad and the Charleston and Savannah Railroad.
With these as a nucleus, Plant began building a transportation system along the southern seaboard.
20 years later this system included 14 railway companies with 2,100 miles of track, several steamship lines, and a number of important hotels.
In 1882 Plant organized, with the assistance of northern capitalists, including Flagler, the Plant Investment Company. This was a holding company for the joint management of the various properties under his control. He reconstructed and extended several small railroads so as to provide continuous service across Florida.
By providing better connections to the north, Plant gave Florida orange growers quicker and cheaper access to northern markets.
Tampa, then a village of a few hundred inhabitants, was made the terminus of his Southern Florida Railroad, and also became the home port for a new line of steamships to Havana.
Plant recognized that his railroad would be a greater success if combined with steamship and steamboat service. In 1886, the Plant Steamship Line was organized.
Plant steamships ran from Tampa to Key West, Mobile, Boston, Halifax and Charlottetown in Canada, and Havana, Cuba.
The Plant Steamship Line went from Port Tampa to Cuba, the Bahamas, Jamaica and New Orleans during the winter season of Plant's Tampa Bay Hotel.
In the summer season, the steamships were also used for service between Boston, New York and Nova Scotia.
At about this time Henry Morrison Flagler was extending his railroad line down the east coast of Florida, first West Palm Beach in 1894,
and then to Miami in 1896.
Plant and Flagler informally divided Florida between them, with Plant concentrating on the west coast down to Tampa, and Flagler along the Atlantic coast down to Miami.
Plant's first wife died in February 1861. In 1873 he married Margaret Josephine Luffman, the daughter of Martin Luffman of New York City, who with one of his two sons survived him.
In the late 1880s Plant began to build hotels at strategic locations along his rail lines in Florida.
These are the Flagler Hotels on the East Coast, and the Plant Hotels extending from Ocala and Winter Park down to Tampa and Punta Gorda.
Plant had 8 hotels on the West Coast and Central Florida: the Ocala House, Seminole in Winter Park, Hotel Kissimmee, the Inn at Port Tampa, Tampa Bay Hotel, Hotel Bellevue in Bel Air, Hotel Punta Gorda and the Fort Myers Hotel.
This is an advertisement for the Plant Hotels.
The Tampa Bay Hotel was Plant's premier hotel for the accommodation of winter visitors. This was built in the style of a Moorish palace, and was an enormous hotel costing $2,500,000.
The subsequent growth in wealth and population of Florida, and other states tributary to the Plant system, made Plant one of the richest and most powerful men in the South.
The Seminole Hotel opened in Winter Park in 1886. This hotel had 250 guest rooms. Many people referred to it as the Grand Resort of Florida.
Guests of the Seminole Hotel were brought from the South Florida Railroad train depot via a horse car that traveled on rails.
Many of these passengers came to Winter Park in the winter months to escape the snow and frigid temperatures of the north.
In its early years, the hotel was able to attract many wealthy northerners using luxuries such as gas lights and steam heating. The hotel featured a very large, beautiful formal dining room, many parlors, suites with open fireplaces, a barbershop, laundry services, and a long colonnaded porch.
Guests could take the elevator to view the surrounding area from the promenade on the top of the hotel.
For the entertainment of the guests, the hotel provided a bowling alley, a billiard hall, tennis and croquet grounds, and an orchestra for dancing.
Other activities included horseback riding, fishing, and sailing on Lake Osceola in sailboats and steam yachts provided by the hotel.
Along with neighboring Rollins College, the hotel and college brought luxury to the edge of the Florida frontier.
The original Seminole Hotel burned to the ground in 1902 and 1912. A second, smaller Seminole Hotel was built. The new hotel also is on the banks of Lake Osceola. This hotel was torn down in 1970.
The Hotel Bellevue was the last remaining grand historic hotel of its period in Florida that existed as a resort. It was built in 1896 and later renamed the Bellevue Biltmore.
The Bellevue Biltmore was a picturesque Victorian hotel on the Intracoastal Waterway in Bel Air, near Tampa. It closed in 2009.
The building was noted for its architectural features and extensive handcrafted woodwork and Tiffany glass. It was said to be the largest occupied wood frame structure in the world and was constructed of native Florida pine wood. The Bellevue Biltmore has hosted many famous people, dignitaries and world leaders through the years, including several U.S. presidents.
The hotel was closed in 2009 and was slated for demolition in 2015. However, a preserved portion of the Bellevue Biltmore Hotel was placed on hydraulic dollies and moved 230 feet.
The structure was placed on a new foundation, where it was restored and reopened in December 2018 as the Bellevue Inn, a boutique hotel.
In Plantsville, he attempted to prevent a partition of his properties to the value of about $10 million by forming a trust for the benefit of a great-grandson. But the will was contested by his widow and declared invalid.
This decision made possible the consolidation of his railroads with other properties to form the Atlantic Coast Line Railroad, now part of CSX since 1986.
Henry Plant's son, Morton Freeman Plant, 1852 to 1918, was vice president of the Plant Investment Company from 1884 to 1902.
Recommended video, The Henry Plant Show, 29 minutes.
Chapter 16. The Tampa Bay Hotel.
Plant brought the railroad to Tampa in 1884. The railroad became the center of the economy, and many businesses located and flourished there.
From downtown Tampa, the railroad went to Port Tampa, where one could board a Plant steamship to Jamaica, Cuba, New Orleans, Bermuda, or other destinations.
A spur of the rail line brought the train up to the west front of the Tampa Bay Hotel, so guests could depart the train and walk directly into the lobby.
The Tampa Bay Hotel cost approximately $2.5 million to build and $500,000 to furnish. Consisting of 500 rooms, some of which were suites of 3 to 7 rooms, it provided a degree of luxury never before seen in Tampa.
Most of the rooms had their own baths and all had electricity and telephones.
In addition, guests were surrounded by a varied collection of furniture, porcelains, Venetian-style mirrors, and sculptures gathered by Mr. and Mrs. Plant in their travels in Europe.
The Tampa Bay Hotel opened in 1891 amid wide fanfare and celebration. Henry Plant's dream was now reality.
The newspapers of the day described it as brightly illuminated, filled with sumptuous decorations, thrilling music and graced with drits, domes and minarets towering heavenward and glistening in the sun. It was a Victorian palace.
The hotel was a lively place with balls, tea parties, and organized hunts during the winter social season. It was open seasonally from December to April in the 1890s.
Once a guest arrived at the hotel, he needed to be entertained. Guests went wild game hunting as well as fresh and saltwater fishing.
Water sports were also included like sailing, rowing, and canoeing. For the less adventuresome, there were bicycles, carriages, and rickshaws to ride around the property.
The hotel also offered golf, tennis, shuffleboard, billiards, and even a racetrack.
After the death of Henry Plant, the building was bought by the city of Tampa in 1904. It continued to operate as a hotel until 1932.
In 1933, the Tampa Municipal Museum was established in order to preserve the legacy of the Tampa Bay Hotel, becoming the Henry B. Plant Museum in 1974.
Today, the mission of the museum is to interpret the Tampa Bay Hotel at the turn of the century, and the Victorian lifestyles of America's Gilded Age.
In 1933, the Tampa Bay Junior College moved into the hotel, using the old suites as classrooms and offices.
Because of the large space afforded by the hotel, the junior college was expanded and became the University of Tampa.
Chapter 17. The Spanish-American War.
Tampa and the Tampa Bay Hotel played an important role in the Spanish-American War of 1898.
Henry Plant convinced the Secretary of War, Russell Alger, to allow Tampa to be the official port of embarkation for troops going to Cuba. His railroad and steamships helped transport troops to Florida, and eventually to Cuba.
The Tampa Bay Hotel became the headquarters for the Army officers awaiting the order for embarkation. The generals planned the war campaigns from the hotel.
Officers and war correspondents stayed here in relative luxury, rocking on the veranda, sipping iced tea and planning and reporting strategies.
Clara Barton gathered supplies for the Red Cross and frequently went to the hotel.
The enlisted men camped in tents around Tampa and other Florida cities, fought off mosquitoes, endured stifling temperatures, wool uniforms, and boredom, while waiting for the signal to start the war.
Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Teddy Roosevelt and his cavalry unit known as the Rough Riders were stationed in Tampa.
A permanent exhibit in the museum is The Spanish-American War and its Tampa Connection, a timeline, photographs of military personnel on the hotel grounds, and artifacts of the period are also included.
The museum also features an audio tape of letters written by a young enlisted man, Henry Dobson, to his parents, describing his time in Tampa and Cuba during the conflict.
Tampa served as the staging area for the American troops invading Cuba.
Tampa was the most important port of embarkation in the Spanish-American War.
This shows troops embarking for the Spanish-American War at Port Tampa.
This again shows troops embarking for the Spanish-American War.
Recommended videos: The Tampa Bay Hotel.
Recommended video: The Tampa Bay Hotel, Florida's first Magic Kingdom. Recommended video: The Tampa Bay Hotel, Florida's first Magic Kingdom. Yahoo.be web link 1445.
Recommended video: The Henry B. Plant Museum, a national landmark.
Tampa.
After the Spanish-American War, Tampa grew rapidly. This is Franklin Street in Tampa, 1910.
This is the Tampa Bay area of Hillsborough County in Pinellas County.
The town of Plant City, near Tampa, is named in honor of Henry B. Plant.
This is the Tampa skyline today.
The University of South Florida is a member institution of the State University System of Florida and is a public research university located in Tampa.
The University of South Florida was founded in 1956 and is the fourth largest public university in the state, with a total enrollment of 48,000.
Florida. Part 1 Table of Contents.
Thanks for watching. Please watch some more of my great videos.